You are listening to the Good Girl Podcast. I am Cameo King, your host, the Good Girl Podcast, where we are redefining the good through uncomfortable truths. We call those uncomfortable truths confessions. I'm always excited about the work I do here. I'm always excited about the conversations we have because so much comes through us being honest. So much comes through us dealing with ourselves, those things we maybe not really want to believe about ourselves. And I think further than that, or on the other side of that, is freedom, right? To me, freedom, peace, contentment, and joy are those goals in life. You can have everything going on, but when you have that freedom, when you have that peace, when you have that joy, all that, everything else doesn't matter. And so that's a part of why I do this work. I used to be one of those folks that was in bondage, right? That did everything for the sake of others. I didn't want to be honest about my desires. I didn't want to be honest about how I felt about things, even acknowledging and honoring my own feelings, right? Whether they were joy, whether they were hurt, whatever it was. And so this is a part of that uncovering work, that unbecoming work, that freeing work. And so I hope you are along for the ride. Every week we have someone on with a confession, and we have an interesting topic that's going to free us. And that's what this week is about. I'm excited because it's not necessarily a taboo topic, but I think we handle it in a taboo way. Like, we don't want to talk about our reproductive health as women very much. I think we talk about it in our circles with our girlfriends. I don't think we talk about it with our maybe our mothers or our caregivers, our grandparents. It's just kind of like, oh, the basics, right? What I don't want to use some of the phrases my aunts used to share with me, but we'll talk about that later on. But I'm excited for this show because we have the support, we have the expertise, and we have I'll call it the pizzazz of the Ingham County Health Department. And we have a wonderful expert that is going to join us on this topic, and I'll bring her in right now. It's none other than Dr. Shoyinka. Dr. Shoyinka, thank you so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure. I've been here, I think, a couple of times now, but I always have fun. So looking forward to it. Hello, everyone.
You need your own plaque, your own studio, something. If you don't know, right? If you don't know Dr. Shoyinka, she's the medical director at the Ingham County Health Department. Again, like she mentioned, she's been on the show several times, providing a lot of information, especially amid the pandemic. So I'm excited to expand, what you know in your role in the community, and also supporting some of our needs and supporting some of the efforts within our community. So again, excited to have you.
Right. Same here.
So
excited to be here.
So we are going to talk about our reproductive health. One of the reasons I'm excited about this show is, like, I see a lot, and I'm sure I don't know how active you are on social media, but I see a lot on social media about what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, these different products, new ways to keep it tight, to keep it right, or what I should be eating. You hear all these different voices about what to do. And so I really just want to have almost like a basic conversation about our reproductive health, and let's start from the beginning, and then we can build there. Especially when we're in the space of thinking about our health, right? It's amid a global pandemic. And so you're now very much aware of how your body functions. And so I hope you're ready for this. I'm
going to try. I'm going to try. Well, yeah, we'll keep it real. We'll keep it simple. And if there's a need to talk about it again, we could do it again. But I agree. It's a good place to start. It's a good idea to start from the basics, and then we can, it's a really broad topic. So
yeah. So let's start right there. So can you define very simply what encompasses reproductive health? Like everything, because when I think about reproductive health, only thing I think about is essentially what it takes to make a baby. That's all I think about.
Right. And I mean, that's what I think, that's where the idea came from, right? But then as we have evolved as a society, we've evolved with, the concept of health generally, we're beginning to understand that not only do we look at the exact thing that we're talking about in terms of how that is affected, but that there's so much more that goes into it. But let me go back to, your question about defining it. According to like the World Health Organization, I pulled this off of the World Health Organization, right? And it just says reproductive health refers to the condition of male and female reproductive systems during all life stages. And that's made of all the organs, the hormone producing glands, including, the pituitary, glands that are in the brain, and, your ovaries, your testicles, all of those things, all of them, making sure that you maintain the health of each respective system and that they function and release, they function properly and release the hormones at the right time for, the right purpose. But then, as I said, that's kind of like what you alluded to in terms of the definition, right, of reproductive health. But when you think about reproductive health in its totality, you want to think of a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being in all matters that relate to your reproductive system, right? So that your reproductive system is functioning and, the processes are in place, it's functioning properly. And think about it, we talk a lot about, hormones and all of this, even the ability to have a baby, which is where you kind of started, you do need to have some things in place apart from just having your organs. There are people who have had trouble having babies because, and then they find out that, it has to do with some kind of mental state, if you're too stressed, if you're too worried, if you're too, there's so many things that can go into it, and I'm sure we're going to dig into some of those pieces. Nutrition, what else is going, socioeconomics, things like that. All of those things play into it. So we think about some reproductive health as something that everyone has a right to, right? Everyone, regardless of color, creed, should have access to be able to get the right reproductive health that they need, that is safe, that's affordable, that is acceptable, be able to do family planning, address fertility. All of those things are really, really important to ensure that every woman, regardless of color, can live a good reproductive life. And that spans through, the whole life course. So we're not just talking about, where most of your audience is, like 20 through 30, maybe early 40s, but even starting from that teenage years, like when puberty starts, and then all the way to your 60s, 70s, thereabouts. So I could go on and on, sorry.
No, you're fine. What I found interesting when you you gave the, literal definition, I'll say the biological definition, but then it was expanded into, your social and emotional well-being is a part of your reproductive health as well. It's something I don't think we hear at all, because when you go to the doctor, I think it's changed over time, but now they're asking about, how is your mental state? Have you been sleeping? And just connecting the two. I think for the longest we have separated, what's happening here or what's happening here, what's happening in your head and what's happening in your heart from what's happening in your body. But when we think about just some very basic things that I understand, when you're stressed, your body releases certain hormones. And when those hormones are consistently released, that's simply not good that's simply not good for the body. And I think a lot of times, and you can tell me, I think our bodies are smarter than we are, right? Meaning,
that is true. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yep.
Like if you're constantly stressed because of an emotion, I think your body's telling you now isn't a good time. And I know there are a lot of other things, that play into if you're having issues with fertility or if you're having issues with infertility. But it's like your body telling you now isn't a good time because this environment isn't good for what you need or what you want to produce.
Exactly.
I just thought that was, I just wanted to highlight that our emotional and mental state are huge.
Critical.
When it comes to our reproductive health.
Absolutely. Yes.
And not just making a baby, right? Just, not like.
And it's not always the same for, so, I love the point that you said, our bodies are smarter than we are, right? We, as you know, there's so much going on in our body that from the beginning of time, even before we became a more civilized society, they're just the way our hormones work, the way we evolve, the way we grow over time, the way our hormones change. All of that is part of our evolution, is part of our basic survival instinct. And so, I love the way you talked about, this is not a good time, because sometimes when there's a lot of stress, you may get pregnant, but then we have other issues that come up in terms of low birth weight, and baby not being healthy, or having a really difficult pregnancy, or things like that. And then we could move on to the other phases of like post pregnancy. We're talking about, as we get older, we develop higher risk for heart disease and diabetes, and all of those things are related to stress and the way our hormones respond to it.
So what should I be doing, right? What should I be doing in my late 30s to live great in my 40s when it comes to my reproductive health? What should I be doing right now?
So that's an interesting question, right? I talked about the life course, so to speak, in terms of how over time, our bodies change. We, as teenagers, we start puberty, and then we get into our 20s, our 30s, our late teens, 20s, 30s. We're at this peak of reproductive life, so to speak, where, like you said, we are able to reproduce. And then as we move into our late 30s, our 40s, our bodies start to change. And that's where, in order for you to move through that course, you want to make sure that every single stage is kind of taken care of in order to, move on to the next. I like to think of women in particular as having two puberties. The first puberty is the one as a young child, your hormones start changing, and then your hormone levels, estrogen levels start going up, and, you start experiencing your menstrual cycle, things like that. And then as we get into our 30s, that second puberty hits. It could be early 40s for some, but it's more so. We used to say, like perimenopause, and menopause was like, people used to think of it like in the 50s and 60s, but really it starts way earlier. Of course, if there are things that happened to in terms of, some of it can be surgical, where we get things done. People get surgical procedures, have to, take out ovaries, take out uterus, things like that, or maybe had like chemotherapy, which might, speed things up a little bit. But that's the thing that you're thinking about in your 30s and late 30s and 40s, is really being ready for that perimenopausal stage. And the reason why I'm kind of backing up is because those changes in our bodies make things, there are things that we can do to make them better, so to speak, to reduce the effects of what perimenopause and menopause would do.
So can you define perimenopause for us?
So perimenopause is that period before menopause, right? Where you have your reproductive hormones are beginning to change, meaning your estrogen levels, the hormones that are responsible for your for your menstrual cycle, and for that help with pregnancy overall, they begin to change, they begin to decrease in numbers, and so, or in volume, so to speak, or in how they're produced. And as a result of that, our bodies change. Now, those hormones, particularly estrogen, is not only takes care of our menstrual cycle, but also is responsible for other things, like the way what our appetite is like. It's responsible for how our fat is distributed in our body. So when we're in, our younger ages, we have fat distributed in our, like your hips and your backside and your thighs, right? And that's what gives women that, that hourglass position, so to speak, or all the curves anyway. And so as we get older and estrogen begins to decrease, a lot of the fat that we have, we're gaining more fat, but then a lot of it goes to our belly. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So, you notice that, people start gaining weight. Not only do they gain weight in those places where the fat was distributed before, but then more of it goes to the belly. And that's where things can be problematic. So my point of explaining that is that the number one thing that you want to do in your 30s is to have a good exercise regimen. Learn to do some kind of moderate intensity exercise, because that helps you with burning off this extra fat that could cause lots of problems over time. The fat in our thighs and in our waist is not as much of a big problem. The one in our stomach it affects the way we process glucose. It affects the way we process insulin. It causes insulin resistance. And so it increases our chances overall of, developing cardiovascular disease, developing diabetes, and so all of that can increase a risk of, big time mortality for women. It happens in men too, but more so in men. And they say that women who in their like perimenopausal age tend to gain like 44% of weight, and a lot of it goes into their bellies. And there's still some coming into the thighs too. So the number one thing I would say is weight. Because I'm going, we're talking simply now, right? These are things that you can do on your own without talking to your doctor, without talking to, anyone else. In your 30s, you're probably still like, you may or may not have had kids. If you're in your late 30s, your kids are getting older. They're a little less dependent on you. So you're probably even you may be less active than you were in your early 30s, because you may or may not. And of course, that happens even more so as you move into your 40s. And so being deliberate about being active is really important. The other thing is, as part of that whole process is diet. Watching what we eat is critical. And I think we can deliberate a little bit more about that too. But, because of what I said about the abdominal fat that we have as a part of the change in our hormones, what we eat in terms of, staying hydrated and, eating fruits and vegetables and staying away from high sugared diets are all things that would really help to reduce the amount of fat that is stored in our bodies, and also reduce our tendency for all those diseases. So those are a couple of things.
Dr. Shoyinka, you talked about premenopause. That's like the stage before menopause. And I want to pause. This isn't a joke. It's not, it's not a play on words. But some of the signs, I think, that happen in premenopause, or just as our hormones are changing, I think one of the most disrespectful things are chin hairs.
I am with you.
They disrespectful, just pop up.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah. That's hormonal changes for you. So perimenopause is like this. Menopause is like this spectrum, where as those hormones are changing, you're seeing all these things happen. Perimenopause can, it can last for up to like 8 years. So it's kind of like that range. Some people it's like 2 to 8 years. Some people it's more. And what happens in there is that's where you start experiencing the disrespectful cheering. And that's because, like I said, the estrogen levels are going down, but then you have all these other androgens like testosterone even though, when you hear testosterone, you hear, it sounds more like a male hormone, but we have it too, but in lower amounts. And so as our estrogen levels go down, our androgens, those testosterone levels, they increase. And those are, some of those places where we have all the, the belly fat that I talked about, but also the disrespectful facial hair. In addition, like our estrogen is what helps with our uterine lining and helps with our menstruation cycle and all of that. As that goes down to, you start experiencing, irregular periods. It could be irregular, it could be heavy, it could be light, it could be intermittent. Like, it just does its own thing. So those are some of the things. The one thing that seems to be the hallmark of perimenopause, and sometimes also into menopause, is hot flashes.
My friend was just talking about that, and I always put that with menopause. I didn't put that with menopause.
No. And so, when you talk about, when you introduced the show, you said this is where we do confessions. That's my confession. It could drive you nuts. Most women, they say about 65% of women will have hot flashes in their perimenopausal period. So there are a few people who are blessed who will never experience it, but it's rough. And this is what happens. Our brain is more sensitive to temperature changes.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden, our brain is responding and sending like a lot of blood flow all the way to, the surface, so to speak. And that results in this heat wave, like this flash of heat, and then you cool down. And then, because there's so much blood rushing to the surface, then people break out in sweat. All those changes could, it makes people sweaty, hot, of course, embarrassing, flushed. People experience like brain fogs too in there. It happens at odd times. It happens at night. So people, I know, night sweats. This is not me talking as a doctor. This is me talking as a woman.
Scary. Can you pause? Like, can I push perimenopause and menopause away? Is there anything I can do?
So there are some things, again, so it takes me back to things that you can do to make it better. There are things that you can do to control, depending on how severe they are. So, it takes me back to my exercise and diet are critical pieces to that. A good exercise regimen will help with some of that. Not exercise crazy, because remember I said those hot flashes, for example, are like sensitivity to like heat. So if you're like working out and really hot, then you may experience a few more. Diet is also important in terms of the amount of sugar, that you take. Sodas, things like that. Processed foods are things that also might contribute to it and kind of like interfere with those hormonal things. Now, those are natural things. People talk about taking things that, drinking more green tea, helping with more, increasing your levels of antioxidants, taking supplementation, different kinds of, supplements. They say, things like magnesium, good vitamin regimen, things like that will help. Again, optimal health, things that you should be doing at baseline, which is when I talked earlier about, what I should be doing in my late 30s. All of those things, good reserves in those areas will help to make this easier. It does not necessarily mean that it'll all go away. Now, if you can't tolerate it, if this is, like messing up with your, life, then that's a time when you're supposed to talk to your healthcare provider about hormone replacement therapy. And there are different ways to do that. There are, some people go back on the pill, like the contraceptive pill, where you get some estrogen replacement. Some people, there are transdermal patches that people can use. And then you can also use like an IUD also, which would also release them. Now, there are some risks associated, particularly with taking the hormone replacement, the orally. I think less so with the other ones, the transdermal or the IUD, but that's a conversation that everyone should have, with their doctor about, you want to check about different risk factors, history of family history of breast cancer, things like that are things that would interfere with that. Now, menopause is a little different. So this is all I've been talking about here.
Yes.
Has been perimenopause. Menopause officially starts when all those irregular, low, heavy periods, when they stop, and they stop for 12 months.
Oh.
And
Yes.
then at that point, you are officially menopausal.
So before we dive into the menopause phase, does this mean, because women are waiting to have children later and later and later, does this mean when I enter the perimenopausal phase that, not that I can't have children, but that the likelihood decreases? I mean, because I'm saying I know some 40, no, I think this woman said she just celebrated her 52nd birthday, and she has a 2-year-old.
Yeah. So it's an excellent question. So we're all different, right? Remember I said the range, it starts from late 30s. That doesn't mean that everybody is going to, start having perimenopausal, experiencing perimenopause in their late 30s. But then again, that process is also like a 2 to maybe 8 to 10 year time frame where it's happening gradually, and then some of those symptoms increase in frequency. And so being in perimenopause does not stop you from getting pregnant. It does reduce fertility overall, but people have babies in their 40s and 50s all the time. And that's why some of you and I were talking about figuring out what your family history is, and knowing like, did your mom did she start having perimenopausal symptoms in her late 40s as opposed to late 30s, or early 50s? What did that look like is also really helpful. The other thing that people see around this period of time is mood swings, irritability, things like that, sleep, one, because of the hot flashes, and then just two, just not being able to sleep a full cycle through. It does affect libido too. Overall, sexual desires change. Some people more so, in most cases, sexual desires are it decreases relative to increasing. And some of that is even just physiological, in the sense that in addition to all of that, you have like vaginal dryness. And so, there's less lubrication. And so it just makes, sex, more painful, more uncomfortable, less likely to be something that, you are looking forward to. And so, again, taking us back to having a good relationship with your primary care provider, because there are things that you can talk about to, support that process, to make that whole perimenopause and menopausal period less stressful overall.
So 2 to 8 years. That's the range. That's a long long time.
Not everybody experiences, like I had, like like my first year, I must have been experiencing it earlier and wasn't paying attention. So another thing I want to say to women is pay attention to your body. Not just because of menopause or perimenopause, but for anything. Things happen to us. Black women are at higher risk of heart disease, cancers, all of those things. So you want to just pay attention to what's going on, so what's changing, and therefore you can talk about it. But anyway, my point was that I wasn't paying attention, and then it started, and I experienced it like heavy hot flashes for about a year, and it's kind of reduced in frequency. So people are different. You never know what that's going to look like, but there's an antidote. There's something to help support that. And I do also want to say, being, this is maybe because this is my season of life. This is why I'm like talking a lot about perimenopause and menopause, but it's not a bad thing. Earlier on, I talked about evolution.
I want to put a pin in there. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's good to know, because even as you're talking, I feel dread. Like, I was like, oh,
no, this is not to scare you.
I was like, okay, we got to get on this baby making train. I need to find somebody. Like literally, that is what's going through my mind. I said, oh my
no.
Lord.
And I apologize if I was painting it that way. But I think a really important thing that we want to, that's important to us, is to know what to expect.
Yeah.
Right? You said it at the beginning. Knowledge is power. It sets us free, right? If you know what to expect, then you know what to ask your doctor about. You know what to research on your own. You know why you're exercising. You know why you're eating healthy. You know why taking care of yourself is way more important than what you did 5 years ago. So that is why we're talking about it, to make those years your best season, not because it's bad, like, oh, beware, this train wreck is coming. No, it's so that you can enjoy your life. So my point about evolution was that we evolve. All of our body systems, the way our hormones work and everything, are all part of our basic survival, the way we function. And I heard someone talk about how our changes in our hormonal path over time is part of our evolution. By the time we get to a certain stage in life, we're not taking care of babies anymore. We're more like that. As people get to menopause, they're in a more supportive role, so to speak. They're taking care of maybe grandchildren, or if they don't have grandchildren or what have you. But women in their 40s and 50s, they're like at their peak of their career. That's when women get things done. That's when your children aren't as dependent on you, or if you don't have kids at all. But that's where you're even more self-aware of who you are. When people will tell you when they get older, they're like, I know exactly what I want, and no, I won't take this. So you can kind of move ahead with life and do what you want to do. So it's a great time.
Yeah.
And so it's certainly not something to look at in a bad way.
Yeah, it's interesting you share that, because having conversations again with my friend and other entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship has been on the rise. One
Absolutely.
of the themes in entrepreneurship has been essentially creating your schedule, or setting your schedule, or even setting your business around your cycle. Because for some people, it really takes them out for a couple of days, whether it's pain, whether it's being tired. And then when you think about the trajectory of someone's life, and you think about the evolution and our body simply being smarter than we are and picking up on cues that we aren't aware of, it makes sense that when you are at the height, when you're like in your 50s, and you in a sense have all your ducks in a row, in theory, you have all this wisdom behind you, you have all this knowledge behind you, you can go a lot faster and move
Absolutely.
differently than if you have this, than if you say are carrying a baby, or if you have to care for a baby, or all these things I'm thinking about.
That's why we're made for that reason. Yes, our life is in seasons.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that sometimes we think that we want to do everything at the same time. We all have goals. I know. Yeah. We all have goals. I know your type.
Don't do me like that.
No, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But we need to remember that we can have it all, but we can't have it all at the same time. And we shouldn't want to have it all at the same time, so that we can enjoy every season of our life and enjoy that all in its totality. You want to be able to enjoy your family and your children when that happens. You want to be able to enjoy your singlehood, to the max, if that's where you're at, So we were made this way. And so we should enjoy those seasons and just put ourselves in the best position to rock each season out. That's just the way to look at it. One important thing to note is that as we grow older, another important, apart from the fat that is deposited more in our stomachs, the one on our skin is not in our thighs and our legs, is subcutaneous fat. And it's not as much of a problem as the one that goes into our bellies, right? The other thing that happens to us as women as we grow older, with each decade, we lose about 5% of our muscle mass, right? And so when I talk about exercise, doing moderate intensity exercise and some kind of strengthening, that's to maintain the muscle mass that you have or increase it, at least reduce the loss that you might be experiencing. So that is the purpose of that. Not necessarily to say that, in your 40s, you need to, like lose a lot of weight or, what have you, but the focus is where that is. When we think about being women, and I think I should have started by saying, what do you want to do? The most important thing I want you to do in your 30s really is to take care of yourself overall. Take care. Self-care is critical. At this late 30s stage, we're probably in this space where, again, we've been running around for our careers. We've been taking care of children and family. We've been doing all of this thing for a while. And so now is the time to say, you know what, if I don't do anything, if I don't take good care of myself, if I don't begin to love myself, then, you're going to end up not being happy in your 40s too. And so self-care is critical, whatever that means. Fat, weight is not necessarily bad. What you do want to do is check with your provider. Check there's a number that we look at that is called our BMI, our body mass index. And so what you want to know is how much fat or muscle do I have relative to my height and my weight to determine what is healthy, for me. The other more important thing is that regardless of how, what our weight or our height is, the idea is to keep moving, to be active is the most important piece of what I talked about. Not necessarily the rush to lose weight, though there might be a need for it. And in some cases, there might be the need to gain weight, depending on, where we are in our life course. So, we need to love ourselves regardless of where we are. And being on one side of the scale or the other is not necessarily bad, but we need to understand what that looks like and what we're doing in that space to maintain our health regardless, i.e. exercise and diet. Diet is a critical piece of, what that looks
like. So is there one thing that, and I feel like I know what the answer is, but is there one thing that, one action that women can take today that'll be good for their productive health tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 or 20 years? Is it one thing that they can do today, like right now they're listening to us?
So that's an interesting question in the context of what we've been talking about. So we've talked about, the exercise piece, right? Mm-hmm. I think the one thing that I would, and we're kind of pivoting today in terms of the context of that. Well, the one thing that I would think about is making sure that you are up to date with your health overall. If you don't have a primary care physician, make sure you make an appointment for one today. That is one thing that I think is, can be a change. If you haven't gotten your pap smear in a while and you're not sure if you're up to date, fix an appointment for that today. I think those are the two things that I would emphasize. As we grow older, as we get into our 40s, it's time to get a mammogram. So if you're 40 and you're listening to me and you haven't scheduled one, make a phone call today. And I know you're going to share some resources as to what we have at the health department to support some of those services.
Yeah, so just to summarize, because, it's funny, I thought you were going to say exercise, even though I know that's what we've been talking about.
I said that. I think I'd emphasize it already.
Yeah.
And so, I said I'd beat that horse, so you might as well move on to something else. But yes, exercising today will make a difference, and then, continuing. But in terms of, some other long-lasting change, that's really important too.
Yes. So again, to summarize the things that you can do today. So if you're listening today, I'm not even going to say by the end of the week, today, make sure you have a healthcare provider. Your family doctor is what I've known them to be.
Yes.
Schedule your mammogram, get a pap smear. Those three things. Yes. 3 things you can do.
Yes. If you
Because it's
don't
like,
have a doctor, get one. If
yeah,
you have a doctor, get a pap smear. If you're due for a mammogram, schedule one. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, Dr. Shoyinka, thank you so much for your expertise today. I thank you so much for sharing. Um, if there is any other questions that maybe you have for the show and you're listening, feel free to comment and maybe we can address them later on, because this is an ongoing series. We're serious about health. We're serious about Black women's health. We're serious about folks of color, our health, and also knowing the role that Black women have in their families, that women of color have in their families, and in their community. Oftentimes we're leading the charges. Oftentimes we are the caregivers, we are the providers, and we're nudging our partners, we're nudging men, we're nudging our fathers, our brothers to move forward in their health as well. And so this will be an ongoing series. Please make sure that you are connected to the Good Girl podcast, whether it's through Instagram, whether it's through subscribing or through Facebook. So again, Dr. Shoyinka, thank you so much for your time. And I
It
can't
was
wait to,
all mine.
I know our
It was
next
all mine.
conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait. There's a lot to talk about. We just scratched the surface today. There's so much Black women in particular. We need to talk about a lot of things and just remind ourselves. But my parting shot will be, take care of yourself. Just like Cameo said, we're the ones who are, they were kind of like that matriarch in our families in one way or the other at some different level, taking care of everybody else. So please don't forget to take care of yourself.
All right, thank you. This is the Good Girl Podcast. Thanks so much for listening to the Good Girl Podcast. That was a very informative podcast by the Ingham County Health Department. They have been a great partner with the Good Girl Podcast and very involved in the community in the Lansing area, the greater Lansing area, and the entirety of Ingham County. So if you stay in Ingham County, here is some information to get connected to the Ingham County Health Department, especially as it relates to reproductive health. Take a look at your screen. You'll see that they offer screening services for women ages 21 to 64, diagnostic services. This is specifically around breast and cervical cancer. They also offer prenatal and new parent services. You can also head over to the Cedar Community Health Center that focuses on women's health. Those numbers are on the screen. I will share them for you. 517-887-4364. Again, 517-887-4364. So thank you so much for your support, Ingham County Health Department, as we continue this conversation, being connected and being involved in the local community.